obviously there's a spiritual component to the whole thing, relating to finances and sowing your seed. But there's also a practical component. And if you don't do the practical, then don't complain if the spiritual doesn't work, because God doesn't do what He does if you don't do what He's called you to do. And so at the beginning of the year, we looked at, putting God first and then lining your life up with Him. And then there it should flow over into your family. Your family is your first cell, your ministry and your secular work. And in terms of this fifth one, your secular work, if you don't do this properly, if you've got the attitude that most people have to their school or their university or their workplace, and they're not faithful to their boss, then, it doesn't matter what you do spiritually, you're going to have a problem. And so the thing is, you need to have a different attitude to what most people do in this country towards their job. And I don't know whatever phase of life you're in, whether it be at school or at university or college or something like that, or you're actually working, it doesn't matter where you are. All right? The thing is, you must do it as if you're doing it for the Lord, because otherwise everything that you've learned here in this series has been in vain. And so thinking about that, in Philippians chapter 4, verse 10 to 13, it says, I rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you have renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you have been concerned but had no opportunity to show it. I am not saying this because I'm in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. And I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do everything through Him who gives me strength. Now, from last week, we learned about the fact that if we're not content, we're going to build up debt. And so you need to start off, you need to be content with what you have. And you need to realize that contentment doesn't come from having more money. Contentment comes from being content in the place where you're at, believing that you can do all things through Jesus who gives you strength. And then Proverbs chapter 24, verse 30 and 31 says, and I want you now to listen to this, and I've just spoken about your workplace, your school place, your university place, whatever's your workplace. Okay, if you're at school, then your workplace is school. Proverbs 24, verse 30 and 31 says, I went past the field of the sluggard. The sluggard is the lazy person. Past the vineyard of the man who lacks judgment. In other words, if you're not working properly, you lack judgment. And then he says this, thorns had come up everywhere. The ground was covered with weeds, and the stone wall was in ruins. I want you to understand that when you look around and you see buildings decaying and people not doing their job properly and people having a lackadaisical attitude to their jobs or their studies or whatever, I want you to understand that what the Bible says here is that what you will produce and what you will harvest is thorns. And that when you look at your finances, all you will have is thorns. You won't have any harvest. Harvest represents what to us would be finances. Today we earn money and we go into the Spar or the Pick and Pay or the Food Lovers Market or wherever and we buy food. And so literally we eat based on what we earn. And what he's saying is now for the lazy person, you will earn thorns, and when you try and sell thorns, no one wants to buy them. And so now, how do you know if you're building this up? Well, there's two things. The one is if you diminish your earning capacity by the way that you work or the way that you study, you're going to have problems. But the second thing is if you start spending more than what you earn. And so today I want to talk about getting into the debt trap. How do you know if you're getting into a debt trap? And for those of you not earning money, you need to take your notes now before you get into the debt trap. Because once you get into it, it's not that easy to get out of it. The first thing that you see is that you begin living on credit instead of paying cash. If you are having to live on credit in order to survive, you've got issues. Proverbs 3 says, don't withhold repayment for your debts. Don't say some other time if you can pay now. So don't pay some other time if you can pay now. And I want to take it from a perspective. Obviously, there's an aspect here of not paying your debt back, which is a sin. But there's another aspect here. Pay cash for it today. Don't swipe it and pay later. Many times when you're swiping it, you're paying later. How do you know if you're living on credit? You know you're living on credit if every single month the amount that you owe is increasing. When the amount that you owe is going up all the time, you know that you're in the debt trap. And there's two big problems with living on credit. Credit that comes from unsecured credit cards shows a lack of contentment in your life. You're not content. When you're not content, you spend too much. And the second thing is you're making presumptions on the future. Sometimes you're saying, I can get this now because I'm going to get an increase there and then I'll be able to afford the repayments. When you're presuming on the future, you're putting yourself at risk because the thing is you might end up in a situation where you don't get the increase that you're expecting. Studies show that if you have a credit card, on average, you'll spend 23% more in a store than if you walk in there with cash. If you've got an envelope and you've got X amount of cash as you walk into the store, studies show that you'll spend 23% less. Which means the stuff that you bought you didn't need. So the first thing is, if you're living on credit, the second sign that you're in the debt trap is that you're delaying payments or paying the minimum fee due. You're delaying it. You say, right, I can push this out to then and I can push it out to then. And you just keep pushing the people that you owe money to further and further and further because you're struggling to keep up with all your repayments. Romans 13 verse 8 says, let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another. For he who loves his fellow man has fulfilled the law. And so, if you're in that situation, you're in the debt trap. The third sign that you're in the debt trap is that you're unable to tithe or save. If you can't tithe and you can't save for the future, because you're having to just constantly fork all your money out to pay the current bills, you're in a debt trap. We spoke last week about the value of tithing and saving. If you never got that, if you weren't here, or if you forgot it, it's on active TV. So I'm not going to go through that again. But just to remind you that Malachi 3 verse 8 says, will a man rob God? Yet you rob me. You ask how we rob you, in tithes and offerings. The reality is if I'm not tithing and if I'm not saving, I'm spending too much. How do I know if I'm spending too much? I'm spending too much the moment I spend more than what I earn. That very second that I do that, I'm spending too much. Proverbs 21 verse 20 says, the wise have wealth and luxury, but fools spend whatever they get. The wise man saves for the future, but the foolish man spends whatever he gets. So if you spend whatever you get, and I want you all to look at me, because this is a problem we've got in South Africa. When you get money, how long do you keep it? If it lasts for about 3.7 seconds, you got a problem. Tell the person next to you, say, I don't have a problem. All right? If you're in a position where, like me, you mustn't have money in your pocket, because if you've got money in your pocket, it's going to go. Then you've got a problem. And the word that the verse uses, I'm not using it. The word that the verse uses is full. The fourth sign that you're in a debt trap is you're unable to pay taxes. Now, when you don't pay your taxes, doesn't matter what you think of the government or the Guptas or anyone, you're under a curse. Jesus himself said in Matthew 22:21, give to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what is God's. Come on, I don't show any excitement here. Come on, pay your tax. Pay that VAT. Come on, Active Church. Pay that VAT. Pay that 14%. Come on, let's get excited to pay our taxes. Come on. Yeah. Number 5 is extravagant spending. Proverbs 21:17. You notice a lot of verses here. Bible's got a lot to say about money. He who loves pleasure will become poor. Whoever loves wine and oil will never be rich. You know those parties you go to? You know the ones that have been planned for 3 weeks? He who loves those parties and the wine and the oil and all of that stuff will be poor. I don't know if you go to the Sabines, if you've ever seen someone who goes there on a regular basis and they walk out of there. I don't know if you've ever seen an oak like that become rich. It's like, you know. Anyone ever seen that? I haven't. Hey, Precious, you got a Sabine there near where you live. Have you ever seen anyone get rich in those Sabines? Just check, except the owner, I mean. The Sabine owner gets rich. So if you're the one selling to all the fools, you understand what I'm saying? Then you get rich, you understand? But there's a warning there. And the 6th sign that you're in the debt trap is if you're always looking for get-rich-quick schemes. You know, if you get this investment, I promise you, people are getting 100% return. I'm not going to mention any names, but you know those things. People come and then they tell you, yo, if you do this, man, then you just got to get 10 other people or 16 other people or 5 other people. And then later on, you given 500 and now you get like 500,000. Yo, I'm in, eh? I'm in. Or the lotto. Hey? The lotto is called the lotto because it's a lotto of people who get an O in their bank account after they played the lotto. That's why in South Africa it's called Lot O, because most of you are going to get an O out of the Lot O. But you believe that as you stand there with your little card, you understand, at the spa on a Saturday, because, hey, it's, you know, the number's up there, it's 24 million. And then I heard you get like 100,000 or 10,000 or something a month. They pay it off over 400 years. You're not going to live long enough to get the whole thing out anyway, even if you win the lotto. Get rich quick schemes. If you are into those things, you're in a debt trap. And so now, Ecclesiastes 5:7 says, dreaming instead of doing is foolishness. Again, it comes back to this work thing. Listen, for those of you in matric, if you were dreaming about passing matric instead of studying, just re-enroll for next year. You understand what I'm saying? Don't worry about whether your name's going to be in the newspaper or not. It won't be there. Okay, dreaming instead of doing is foolishness. That doesn't help to become spiritual and you're not doing the physical stuff. One of the things that you should know when you read the Bible is, yes, you don't just worry about the physical stuff, but if you just become spiritual and you're up there in the clouds, you sound like a freakazoid and a fruitcake. There's practical stuff. You should be the best workers, getting the highest marks, having the best qualifications, and being the best people to employ. People should be coming and falling over themselves to give you a job, which means that even when you're in the workplace, you're always learning. Amen, Cloney. Thank you for that support. It's surprisingly silent here, especially from the bank on my left here. Even there when you're in the bank, you've got to learn those procedures. You understand what I'm saying? You've got to learn those coins. But it's only banking. Hey, banking is important. You understand? Even the Bible talks about the banker giving you interest. So you should be interested. Amen. So what's a 9-step plan to getting out of debt? The first step is this. Commit to becoming debt-free now. So I want to challenge you. Even if you're sitting here and you're not working yet, I want to challenge you today, right now, to commit to becoming debt-free now. Psalm 37:21, the wicked borrow and do not repay. How many of you have lent money for a quarter and Oak's waiting for a quarter of a century to get their money back, if you understand what I'm saying? Okay, now, you have to be committed to become debt-free now. It won't be easy. Tell the person next to you, it won't be easy. It doesn't help to go out of the service all excited about this. You got to commit to it, and then you got to stick to it. And it means when you want to spend money, then you have to make certain choices. The second step, and I'm challenging you all, even if you're in school, write this down now. Write this down now. And take it with last week's. And if you will do this for 5 years, you'll be shocked in 5 years' time as to where you'll be. And you won't need an increase. Number 2, you start tithing and saving first. You tithe 10% and you save 10%. Okay, last week we spoke, at least aim to work on the 10-10-80 plan. Tithe 10%, save 10%, and live off 80%. Start there. And then go on to have a plan over a few years to get to the 10-10-10-20-50 plan. Tithe 10%. Anyone remember what it is? Save 10%. Sow 10%. Invest 20%. And live off 50%. Come on, some people remember that. Give them a big round of applause. You won't get to that unless you haven't started working yet. You won't get that. And those of you who haven't started working, you really want to work on that principle from the day you get your first salary. Number 5, list all our own and list all our owe. Put a list down. This is what I own, this is what I owe. Proverbs 24:3. By wisdom a house is built, and through understanding it is established. Proverbs 18:13. It is stupid to decide before knowing the facts. Okay, so get a list. Know where you're at. Number 4 is have a sale. Have a sale. Don't go buy on the sale. You have a sale. You put up a sale sign and let someone give you money on the sale. You understand what I'm saying? You have a sale. If you're stuck in the debt trap, you have some things you need to get rid of. Maybe there's some expenses. Maybe DSTV, or maybe those sweets, those fudges that you buy on a Saturday night. You know those things that die for the hair, for that hairstyle. You understand what I'm saying? Which you then cover with a hat anyway, so I'm not sure why you dye the hair. I'm just teasing. I love ripping Wandile off, but he's enjoying it. He's smiling. Don't worry, he's smiling. I won't rip any of the girls off for the hairstyle, because otherwise you know what will happen to me. Sometimes you've got stuff, and if you just put up a table and say sale, jumbo sale, get some cash for some of the stuff. Get rid of things that cost you, because even the things that cost you, even the things you've paid for, there's often costs related to keeping it going. Number 5 is then set up a repayment plan. The thing is, you won't get out of debt by accident. You need to have a plan. This is how we're going to repay it back. Proverbs 21:5 says, good planning and hard work lead to prosperity. Good planning and hard work. And that's why some of you need counsel. Some of you need to come and find out, how do you budget? It's not that difficult if you know how. If you don't know how, you can get help in the church. You can get help. Tell the person next to you can get help. Number 6, get a counselor involved in your life when you're setting up a plan. For many of you, it can be a cell leader. If your cell leader doesn't know, somewhere along the line, believe me, people will be able to get wise counsel in this church. You don't have to be financially stupid. If you're financially stupid in this church, it's because you've chosen to be financially stupid. Number 7, step number 7, decide to do it in half the time. Decide to do it in half the time speaks of you've got a debt. And say now, your debt is 5 years. You got to pay this thing off for 5 years. Your aim is that you want to pay it off in 2.5 years. Which means you've got to pay more every month, which means you've got to live on less. So now you're thinking it's impossible. But Luke 18:27 says, what is impossible with man is possible with God. Step number 8, you add no new debt. Hebrews 13:5, be content with what you have. Be content with what you have. Step number 9, share my plan with my creditors. Share my plan with my creditors. Sometimes you're struggling to pay things off. And then what happens is that you don't speak to them, you just don't pay. This is actually part of step number 8. I've just realized that. But the whole thing of paying it off in half the time includes the fact that if you sit down, if there's problems, and you'll say to your creditors, listen, this is what I can do for now. This is my plan, but by then I'm going to do that, and by then, they'll talk to you. They'll listen to you. When you go and you sit down and you speak to them, most times, they'll sit and they'll work with you, because what creditors hate is when you owe them the money and then they phone you and you don't answer the phone. And if someone owes you money and now you phone them to ask them because they haven't paid and then they don't answer the phone, you're going to freak out too. And so you get a plan going, you pay them off one at a time, slowly but surely. But they know they're getting their money. You think they'll never do it, but Proverbs 6:7 says, when your ways please the Lord, He'll make your enemies into friends. So all of us, is part of step 8. My notes have gone a bit awry. So He'll help you. Step number 9 is you've got this whole plan. Now stick to it. Stick to it. Galatians 6:9. Let's not be tired of doing what is right, for after a while we will reap a harvest of blessing if we don't get discouraged and give up. You stick to it. I want you really just to think about this whole thing of finances right now. And I really want to encourage you in terms of that to start building your finances God's way. We're living in a world which has a financial system that is messed up. Many people do not understand how things work, and how the fact that many of the things that we see as valuable are built on absolutely nothing. In the 1970s, for example, they decided to detach money from gold. Up until then, money was attached to gold. So if you had a 10 Rand note or a 100 Rand note, there was that amount of gold sitting in the Reserve Bank. And so that piece of paper had value because of the gold. Then they detached money from the Reserve Bank, and so now 10 Rand is only worth what people believe it's worth. That's the system we live in now. If you look at diamonds, people see as expensive because of advertising. And there are so many diamonds available. Diamonds could be cheap. And so what happens is they carefully control the amount of diamonds that get into the market to keep them expensive. And they add a whole lot of advertising to say diamonds are a girl's best friend. What can you do with a diamond other than flash it in people's faces and say, look here. There's nothing you can do with it. You understand? And so you've got to understand this. And obviously, we live life, we consume things. We consume food and all of this thing, and that's why we get money, is to be able to live. And so diamonds is awesome, but you've got to understand, take a godly way of looking at your finances. And your finances won't be built on nothing. And you will grow in wealth. And I believe God has created this church to be one of the tools He uses in South Africa to lift people economically.